He was not barking at the locker because he was trained to. He was crying because something inside was still breathing. Just before dawn at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, the maintenance corridor behind Hangar 6 sat quiet under a row of tired fluorescent lights, the kind that hummed like insects trapped in glass. The rest of the base was only beginning to stir, a few engines coughing awake somewhere beyond the roll-up doors, boots crossing wet pavement in the distance, the flag rope tapping softly against a pole in the coastal wind. The air smelled of metal, floor wax, rain, and the faint bite of diesel that seemed to live in every corner of a marine facility, no matter how often it was cleaned. Staff Sergeant Jake Collins had been on duty since 0400, moving through the old equipment wing with a clipboard in one hand and a paper cup of black coffee cooling in the other. He was 36, broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, with close-cropped brown hair and light gray eyes that rarely gave away what he was thinking. A thin scar cut through one eyebrow, not dramatic enough to invite questions, but visible enough to suggest he had learned the hard way that life could change in the space between one breath and the next. Beside him walked Titan, a 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 with a black and tan coat, a strong chest, and amber eyes that seemed too old for a dog. Titan had worked with Jake for 4 years. He knew the difference between routine and danger. He knew when to sit, when to search, when to stay silent. Most of all, he knew Jake's heart in ways Jake did not like to admit. On bad mornings, when the memories came sharp and uninvited, Titan would press his shoulder against Jake's leg without being called. No noise, no performance, just weight, just warmth, just a living reminder that not every war followed a man home to destroy him. That morning was supposed to be nothing more than inventory. 2 missing battery packs, 1 mislabeled crate, a row of old lockers scheduled to be cleared before the building renovation. Jake had done this kind of work more times than he could count, and Titan usually treated it with the bored patience of a seasoned partner waiting for humans to finish their paperwork. But halfway down the corridor, near locker C-17, Titan stopped. At first, Jake kept walking. The leash went tight in his hand. He turned back, expecting Titan to have caught the scent of a raccoon or maybe food someone had left where they should not have. But the dog was not sniffing the floor. He was staring at the locker. His ears stood high. His tail hung stiff behind him. Then he made a sound Jake had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a growl. A thin, broken whine, soft enough to be swallowed by the hum of the lights, but full of such urgency that Jake felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. Titan, he said quietly. The dog stepped closer to the locker and pressed his nose to the vented metal door. He inhaled once, then jerked back as if the scent had struck something deep inside him. Another whine escaped him, lower this time, trembling at the edges. Jake set the coffee down on a storage shelf. The corridor suddenly felt longer than it had a second ago. The lights flickered once overhead, washing the row of lockers in a weak white pulse. C-17 was painted the same dull gray as the others, dinted at the bottom, a strip of tape peeling from the top corner. No name tag, no warning sign, nothing that should have made a trained K9 stand frozen with distress in his eyes. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, though the words sounded more like a prayer than a command. Titan lifted one paw and touched the locker door. Metal clicked faintly beneath his claws. Then he looked back at Jake. That was what changed everything. Dogs could be excited. Dogs could be stubborn. Dogs could be wrong. But Titan's eyes were not asking for permission. They were pleading. Jake felt something old and heavy shift in his chest, a memory of field tents and storm-dark skies, of men trusting instincts before radios, maps, or reports. He crouched beside Titan and placed 2 fingers against the locker door. It was cool, almost damp from the morning air. For one long second, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere behind the metal, came the smallest sound. So faint Jake almost missed it. A tiny scrape. A pause. Then a breath, weak and uneven, like a secret trying not to disappear. Jake did not move. Titan did not blink. The whole corridor seemed to hold still around them. The base outside continuing its ordinary morning, while something hidden waited behind a closed door. Jake reached for his radio slowly, his voice low and steady even as his pulse began to climb. "Control, this is Staff Sergeant Collins in Hangar 6. I need assistance at the East Maintenance Lockers. Possible live find. Repeat, possible live find." Static answered first. Then a voice came back, casual, unaware of the weight gathering in that narrow hall. Copy, Staff Sergeant. What kind of live fine? Jake looked at Titan, at the way the shepherd kept his body pressed close to the locker, as though warmth alone could reach whatever was inside. Another faint breath came through the vent. This time there was no mistaking it. Jake swallowed hard. I don't know yet, he said. But Titan does. Jake kept his hand near the locker door, not touching the latch yet, not rushing the moment. Marines were trained to move fast when speed mattered, but they were also trained to understand that panic could ruin what patience might save. Behind him, the radio crackled again. Then footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor, sharp against the polished concrete. Corporal Ryan Webb arrived first, young, pale-skinned, red-haired, still carrying the nervous energy of a man who had not yet learned how heavy silence could be. Behind him came Gunnery Sergeant Paul Mercer, older, square-jawed, with a face weathered by years of Carolina sun and command decisions. Mercer took one look at Titan and stopped smiling. What have we got? He asked. Jake did not look away from C-17. Something alive inside. Webb blinked. Inside the locker? Titan answered before Jake could. He whined again, then pressed his body against the bottom vent as if trying to make himself small enough to reach through it. The sound went through Jake like cold water. Not fear. Recognition. The kind of sound a living creature makes when it understands helplessness but refuses to leave. Mercer stepped closer, lowering his voice. Any chance this is a drill? Jake shook his head. Nobody. Told Titan. That settled it. Mercer motioned Webb back. Get facility keys. And bring medical. Quietly. Webb turned and hurried away, the soles of his boots squeaking once before the corridor swallowed him. For a moment, only three remained. Jake, Mercer, and Titan, standing before a dented gray locker that had become the center of the whole waking base. Outside, a truck rolled past the hangar doors, its engine low and distant. Somewhere, a gull cried over the damp morning. The ordinary world kept going. That almost made it worse. Jake crouched again and studied the locker more carefully. Old combination lock. Scratched paint near the handle. A strip of dried mud along the bottom hinge. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that belonged in a story people would believe. But Titan kept his nose close to the vent, breathing slow, taking in whatever truth the metal was trying to hide. Jake had seen Titan alert on explosives, narcotics, missing equipment, and once on a lost child during a family day search exercise when the little boy had crawled under a bleacher to hide from the noise. Titan's signals always changed with the situation. A hard sit for threat. A focused stare for scent trail. A bark when he needed humans to stop being foolish. This was different. This was grief before grief had permission to arrive. Mercer noticed it too. His jaw tightened. He is acting like he knows what is in there. Jake nodded slowly. Or what it means. The words hung between them. Jake did not like saying things that sounded spiritual on duty. He preferred facts, tools, procedures, reports. But there were moments in life when truth did not arrive wearing official language. Sometimes it came in a dog's trembling breath. Webb returned with the maintenance ring, a first aid kit tucked under one arm, and Navy Corpsman Daniel Brooks close behind him. Brooks was in his early 40s, pale-skinned, calm-eyed, with sandy blonde hair clipped short and a quietness that made rooms feel steadier. He had treated heat exhaustion, broken fingers, panic attacks, and the hidden wounds men tried to call headaches. He glanced at Titan, then at Jake. How long has he been alerting? 5 minutes. Maybe. 6. Brooks set the kit down gently, as if loud sounds might hurt whatever waited inside. Webb sorted through the keys, his fingers fumbling. The ring jingled too brightly in the stillness. Sorry, he whispered, though no one had asked him to. Titan flinched at the sound, then gave a low, urgent whimper. Jake raised one hand. Slow. Webb froze. Mercer took the keys from him with surprising gentleness. Breathe, Corporal. Webb nodded, face pale. The first key did not fit. Neither did the second. The third slid halfway in and stopped. Jake heard another sound from inside the locker, weaker than before. A small shift. A faint exhale. Titan pawed once at the floor and looked up at Jake with such naked desperation that Jake felt his throat tighten. Come on, Jake whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to Mercer, to the key, to Titan, or to the hidden soul behind the steel. Mercer tried the fourth key. It entered cleanly. The lock turned with a dull click. Everyone stopped. No one opened the door. Not yet. That single sound seemed to divide the morning into before and after. Brooks put on medical gloves. Webb stepped back until his shoulders touched the opposite row of lockers. Titan rose onto all fours, body shaking with restraint, trained enough not to lunge, loyal enough to ache. Jake wrapped his fingers around the handle. The metal felt colder now. He glanced once at Mercer. Mercer gave a small nod. Easy. Jake pulled. The locker door opened 3 inches, then stuck, held by something wedged behind it. A smell slipped out first, stale cloth, dust, fear, and something warm beneath it all, something living. Titan let out a sound so soft it nearly broke. Jake lowered himself to one knee and looked through the narrow gap. At first, he saw only a folded tarp, an old duffel bag, and a tangle of training towels. Then the tarp moved. Just once. Barely. From inside the darkness came the smallest cry, thin as a thread, and every Marine in the corridor forgot how to breathe. Jake gently pushed the locker door open the rest of the way, and a small, trembling bundle emerged, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket that smelled faintly of dust and the lingering tang of metal from the locker. Titan immediately pressed against Jake's leg, tail low but wagging slightly, eyes flicking back and forth between him and the fragile occupant. The bundle let out a weak, high-pitched whimper, and Jake carefully lifted it into his arms, feeling its tiny, shivering weight, heart beating almost as fast as his own. Mercer knelt beside him, adjusting the overhead lights so that the glow illuminated the corridor without startling the fragile life in Jake's hold. Brooks approached with a folded towel from the medical kit, lowering it gently over the bundle to provide warmth, while Webb hovered a respectful distance away, hands clasped tightly, eyes wide with the awe of witnessing a quiet miracle in the ordinary routine of morning duties. Jake whispered softly to the small creature, reassuring sounds, a voice steady despite the rapid rise and fall of his own chest. Titan circled them, sniffing carefully, then laying his head near Jake's knee as though to lend a silent promise of protection. The corridor air smelled of paper, dust, and coffee now, mixed with the faint scent of warmth radiating from the bundle. Every sound felt magnified. The soft padding of Titan's paws, the gentle clink of a metal key on the floor, the distant hum of the hangar doors opening outside. Jake's mind was alert, noting the bundle's breathing, the slight twitch of tiny limbs, the rise and fall of a chest so small it could have been overlooked if not for Titan's insistence. Mercer muttered quietly, "Looks like he or she has been in there for hours at least. You think it is dehydrated?" Jake nodded, eyes scanning the small form for signs of distress beyond the shivering and shallow breaths. "Possibly, but Titan led us here. That counts for something." Brooks had already opened the small first aid kit and produced a bottle of warm saline solution, gently moistening a soft cloth to clean the little face and limbs. Every movement was slow and deliberate, intended to calm rather than alarm. The small bundle responded, lifting its head slightly, amber eyes glinting in the corridor light, recognizing safety in the combination of human hands and a dog that had not left. It sighed. Webb whispered, "I cannot believe Titan knew. How did he know something was wrong in a locker?" Jake glanced down at his companion, the German shepherd's eyes steady, almost human in their focus. "Instinct," Jake said, voice low, almost reverent. "Sometimes instincts are louder than all the alarms, all the rules." The bundle's tiny body relaxed slightly. Each careful motion met with Jake's soft reassurances, Titan's protective stance, and Mercer's quiet efficiency. Even the distant noises of the base, engines and voices now awake, felt muted, as though the corridor had become a sacred space where urgency and hope were intertwined. The fragile creature was now nestled against Jake's chest, the blanket wrapped snugly around it, Titan at his side, tail flicking with a rhythm that seemed to pulse with the newfound life in their midst. Jake's eyes swept the corridor one more time, taking in the fluorescent flicker, the peeling paint, the scattered tools, and the faces of Marines and corpsmen who had quietly formed a ring around this small miracle. A faint smile touched his lips despite the early hour and the weight of responsibility. The knowledge that something so small and vulnerable had been brought safely into the light through teamwork, vigilance, and the silent communication of a dog who refused to look away. The bundle let out a soft, contented sigh, pressing closer against Jake, and Titan exhaled with a low, satisfied sound, head still resting against Jake's leg. Brooks gently lifted a thermometer, checking temperature, while Mercer adjusted a nearby light, observing with calm precision. Every detail mattered. The rise and fall of the chest, the steadiness of the breathing, the warmth of the tiny body, the careful way the dog maintained presence without overwhelming. Outside the corridor, the day began, sunlight breaking over the hangar, spilling golden beams onto concrete and metal. Inside, however, time seemed suspended in the quiet, cinematic space of concern, instinct, and quiet joy. Jake held the tiny bundle closer, feeling the heartbeat against his chest, Titan's steady breathing alongside, and understood in a moment that this was the intersection of patience, faith, and silent courage. A small miracle had been discovered not in the noise of alarms or the precision of procedure, but in the insistence of a loyal companion, guiding the hands of those who chose to notice. In that long, suspended corridor, Jake Collins, Staff Sergeant of the United States Marines, understood again the gravity of the bond between man and dog, the way instinct and attention could rescue a life unnoticed, and the quiet dignity of a moment that was already becoming legendary in their own quiet way. Brooks shifted the blanket just enough for the little face to catch the light, and only then did the truth begin to take shape. It was a puppy, a German shepherd, no more than 7 or 8 weeks old, with damp black and tan fur, oversized paws, and ears still soft at the tips. One ear folded forward as if it had not yet decided whether to stand brave or stay small. His eyes were open now, cloudy with exhaustion but bright beneath it, amber like Titan's, with that same watchful flame that made Jake feel the air leave his chest. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The team had expected a trapped animal, maybe a stray that had slipped into the building during the storm, maybe a frightened creature seeking warmth. But this puppy had not wandered into a closed locker by accident. He was tucked behind a duffel bag with a towel beneath him, a cracked plastic water dish beside one paw, and a small military green collar folded under the blanket like somebody had placed it there on purpose. Mercer reached in carefully and lifted the collar with 2 fingers. A tiny metal tag swung from it, catching the fluorescent light with a dull silver blink. The tag was old, scratched, and too large for the puppy. Jake leaned closer. On one side, nearly hidden under grime, were the words Service K9 Training Candidate. On the other side was a name, printed by hand in black marker that had started to fade. Hope. Webb swallowed. His name is Hope? No one answered right away. Titan took 1 step forward and lowered his head until his nose almost touched the puppy's. The little German shepherd blinked, then gave a weak, broken sound. Not fear, not pain, but recognition of another living warmth. Titan went still. His whole body changed. The tension that had held him like wires softened into something deeper. He did not lick. He did not push. He simply stayed, breathing slow, making himself a wall between the puppy and the cold world. Jake felt that silent choice all the way through him. He knew, Webb whispered. He knew it was a puppy. Brooks checked the tiny heartbeat again, his fingers gentle against the small ribs. He is cold and tired, but he is responsive. That is good. That is very good. Mercer's eyes remained on the locker. He was not an emotional man, at least not where anyone could see, but there was a tremor in the way his hand closed around the tag. This building was locked after yesterday's supply check. Jake looked toward the far end of the corridor, where the hangar doors now glowed faintly with morning. Who had access? Mercer did not answer. He did not need to. A question like that had weight, and sometimes the weight was enough. Brooks wrapped the puppy more securely and nodded toward the exit. We need to get him to the veterinary clinic on base. Warmth first. Fluids if needed. No crowds. Jake stood carefully, cradling Hope against his chest. The puppy gave a tiny sigh and tucked his nose beneath Jake's chin, as if the rhythm of a human heartbeat was the first safe sound he had heard in too long. That small movement did something to the room. Webb turned away quickly and wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Mercer looked down at the floor. Even Brooks, steady as stone, paused before lifting the medical kit. Titan stayed glued to Jake's side as they moved down the corridor, every step measured, every sound softened by the seriousness of what they carried. Outside the maintenance wing, the base had fully entered morning. A formation was calling cadence somewhere beyond the hangar. A forklift beeped near the loading bay. The American flag snapped in the damp coastal wind, red and white catching the first gold edge of the sun. But for Jake, the world had narrowed to the warmth under the blanket and the quiet click of Titan's nails on concrete. They crossed 30 yards of wet pavement toward the base veterinary annex, a low brick building near the K9 training yard. Titan kept looking up at the bundle, then forward, then back again, as if counting every breath. Hope stirred once when the wind touched his nose. Jake pulled the blanket closer. "You are all right, little man," he murmured. "You are not in there anymore." The words surprised him. They sounded like something he had once needed someone to say to him. At the clinic door, Dr. Emily Carter was waiting, called ahead by Brooks. She was in her late 30s, pale-skinned, with blonde hair pulled back in a careful knot and blue eyes that missed very little. She opened the door before Jake could knock. Warm air spilled out, carrying the clean scent of antiseptic, cotton, and dog shampoo. "Bring him in," she said softly. Titan tried to follow, then stopped at the threshold as if asking permission. Dr. Carter glanced at him, then at Jake. He found him. Jake nodded. He would not leave the locker. Dr. Carter's expression changed, not into surprise exactly, but respect. Then he comes to. Inside, the lights were warmer, the floors clean, the room quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock. Jake laid Hope on a padded exam table, keeping one hand on the blanket until the puppy settled. Titan sat below the table, eyes locked upward, refusing to blink. Dr. Carter examined Hope with the careful grace of someone who understood that small lives deserved large attention. She checked his temperature, his gums, his paws, his breathing. The puppy trembled but did not cry. Each time his body tensed, Titan gave one low, gentle huff, and Hope relaxed again as if the older dog's breath carried a language older than commands. Then Dr. Carter paused at the collar tag Mercer had placed beside the table. She lifted it. Her face went still. Jake saw it. So did Mercer. "Doctor?" Jake asked. She turned the tag under the lamp, reading the faded marker again. "Hope." Her voice softened until it almost disappeared. "This was not just any puppy," she said. "This tag came from the old service litter program that was shut down last month." Webb frowned from the doorway. Then why would he be? In a locker? Dr. Carter looked at the puppy, then at Titan, then back at Jake. Outside, morning light pressed against the clinic windows, bright and innocent, but the room had gone quiet in a way that made every breath feel important. "Because someone may have thought he was not worth saving," she said. Titan lowered his head onto the edge of the exam table, close enough for Hope to feel him, and the tiny puppy, with all the strength he had left, stretched one paw from the blanket and rested it against Titan's muzzle. Dr. Carter did not move for a moment. She looked at the tiny paw resting against Titan's muzzle, and whatever professional distance she had been holding softened in her eyes. Hope's paw was so small it barely covered the bridge of Titan's nose, yet Titan accepted it with the seriousness of a vow. He did not pull away. He did not blink. He simply breathed slowly, letting the puppy feel the steady warmth of a protector who had already chosen him. Jake stood beside the table with his hands resting on the edge, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on that fragile contact, as if it contained an answer he had been looking for since long before sunrise. "How bad is he?" Jake asked. Dr. Carter returned to the examination with quiet precision. "He is cold, dehydrated, and exhausted. But his heartbeat is stronger than I expected." She slid a small warming pad beneath the towel and adjusted it carefully. "That is the good news." Mercer heard what she did not say. "And the bad?" Dr. Carter glanced at the tag again. The old service litter program had strict records. Every candidate was documented. Every pup had a health file, a handler assignment, and a transfer order if they failed evaluation. Her voice stayed calm, but there was something troubled beneath it. A puppy does not just vanish into a locker. Webb stood near the door, arms folded as if he were cold, though the clinic was warm. Maybe somebody moved him during the renovation and forgot. The sentence died almost as soon as it left his mouth. He knew it did not fit. They all did. Hope had been wrapped, given a water dish, tucked away, not dumped carelessly, not left in the open, but hidden where silence, could do what cruelty never had to announce. Jake looked down at Titan. Who would decide a puppy was not worth saving? No one answered. The wall clock ticked once. Then again. Outside, the training yard came alive with distant barks and shouted commands. But inside the exam room, the sounds felt far away, like another life playing behind glass. Dr. Carter prepared a small syringe of fluids and spoke softly as she worked, not to the Marines at first, but to Hope. You are going to feel better soon, little one. Not fast, not all at once, but soon. Hope trembled when the cool touch reached him, then calmed as Titan gave another low huff against the table. Jake noticed the rhythm of it. The older K9 was not just watching. He was guiding. Every time Hope grew tense, Titan answered with steadiness. Not a command. Not training. Something older than both. He trusts Titan, Brooks murmured. Dr. Carter nodded. Most puppies do. But this is different. She looked at Jake. Titan may have smelled distress, dehydration, fear, even the pup's body temperature dropping. But the way he stayed at that locker tells me he heard something the rest of us missed. Jake remembered the first whine in the corridor, the way the sound had pulled him out of routine like a hand closing around his sleeve. He heard enough. Mercer stepped toward the exam table and placed the old tag in a clear evidence bag, his movements careful and respectful. I will check access logs, locker assignments, maintenance schedules, everyone who entered Hangar 6 after the supply check. His voice had changed. It was no longer only command. It was promise. Jake nodded but kept his eyes on Hope. The puppy's breathing was still shallow, but the frantic edge had eased. Warmth was beginning to reach him. His tiny ears twitched as if he were listening to a dream. Dr. Carter lifted the blanket enough to examine his markings. A dark saddle ran across his back, soft and uneven, not yet fully grown into itself. One white fleck touched the center of his chest, small as a drop of paint. Jake noticed it and felt an unexpected ache. He has a star, Webb whispered. Dr. Carter smiled. Faintly, more like a spark. Hope opened his eyes then. Not fully, just enough to find Titan again. The puppy's gaze moved from the older shepherd to Jake, unfocused but searching. Jake leaned closer, lowering his voice to the same tone he used on stormy nights when Titan paced by the door. You made it, he said. You hear me? You made it. Hope gave a weak breath that sounded almost like a sigh. It was not victory. Not yet. It was only a thread of life holding on. But sometimes a thread is enough when the right hands find it. Brooks checked the warming pad, and then rested 2 fingers lightly near Hope's shoulder. Temperature is coming up a little. Dr. Carter exhaled, the first sign of relief she had allowed herself. Good. We keep him warm. We give small fluids. We let him rest. No loud noise. No crowd. Mercer looked toward the door, where 2 Marines had gathered quietly in the hallway, drawn by whispers moving across the base faster than any announcement. He stepped out and spoke in a low voice. Give them space. The hallway cleared without argument. When Mercer returned, his expression was harder. This stays calm. This stays respectful. He is not a spectacle. Jake appreciated that more than he could say. Hope did not need curiosity. He needed mercy. The minutes stretched. Sunlight rose higher through the clinic windows, turning the exam room gold along the edges of the cabinets. Dust motes drifted in the warm beam, like tiny prayers no one had spoken aloud. Titan finally lowered himself onto the floor beneath the table, but he kept his head up, eyes fixed on Hope, refusing sleep though his body must have been tired from the tension. Jake slid down into the chair beside him and rested one hand on Titan's broad neck. The fur there was warm, familiar, solid. You did good, partner, he whispered. Titan did not look away from the puppy. His tail tapped once against the floor. Dr. Carter dimmed the overhead light and covered Hope with a softer blanket, blue with tiny paw prints faded from years of washing. The puppy relaxed into it, still weak, still fragile, but no longer hidden in the dark. Then, just as the room began to breathe easier, Hope made a small sound. Not the thin cry from the locker. Not the frightened whimper from the exam table. This was different. A soft, searching noise, barely more than air, but filled with need. Titan rose instantly. Jake did too. Dr. Carter leaned in. Hope moved his nose beneath the blanket and nudged toward the old collar lying inside the evidence bag near Mercer's hand. Mercer looked down. The room went still again. Jake felt the old unease return, slow and cold. Hope was not only reacting to Titan. He was reacting to the tag. Dr. Carter's face tightened as she looked more closely at the faded writing under the lamp. Beneath the name Hope, nearly worn away, was a second line no one had noticed before. It was not a handler name. It was not a kennel number. It was a date. 1 week earlier. Jake's eyes lingered on the faded date beneath Hope's name, and a chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. 1 week earlier. The thought twisted his mind through possibilities, none of them comforting, yet each one highlighted how critical this discovery was. Titan, sensing Jake's tension, nudged his shoulder with the tip of his nose, offering quiet reassurance without needing words. The puppy shifted beneath the blanket, small limbs stretching and curling as he settled into the warmth radiating from Jake's chest. Dr. Carter carefully adjusted the blanket again, her hands slow and deliberate, giving Jake space to absorb the moment. She did not speak. Sometimes, the silence itself was the most important communication. Jake leaned closer to Titan, murmuring, "You knew something was wrong before anyone else even stepped inside." Titan tilted his head, ears alert, as though acknowledging the compliment while keeping watch over the fragile bundle. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, shadows dancing across the walls as if mirroring the careful attention in the room. Brooks measured out fluids, speaking softly to the puppy as he placed the syringe near Hope's mouth. The tiny creature drank cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence, each gulp sending a subtle rise and fall across his chest that reassured every Marine in the room. Mercer observed quietly, noting every micro-expression on the faces of his team, the puppy, and the older K9, the way tension and relief danced invisibly through their postures. Outside, distant sounds of the base continued, but inside the exam room, time seemed suspended, a pocket where life was measured only by breaths and heartbeat. Jake kept his hand resting lightly on the blanket over Hope, feeling the small, rapid pulses beneath his palm, feeling the fragile trust solidify into a tentative bond. He glanced at the tag again. The date implied oversight, neglect, or misplacement, but no cruelty. Whoever had placed Hope in the locker had intended him to be discovered, or perhaps simply hoped that someone like Titan would notice. Titan's ears flicked as the puppy gave a small whimper, a sound of tentative acknowledgement. Jake whispered, "We are going to make sure you are okay. You hear me?" Hope pressed his tiny nose against the blanket, turning slightly toward Titan, and Jake felt the puppy's energy shift from desperate to tentative, as if the presence of a guardian had been a silent promise fulfilled. Dr. Carter began checking the puppy's vitals more thoroughly now, measuring temperature, pulse, and respiration, each step deliberate and slow, giving Hope time to adjust. Every movement, every sound, every breath was magnified by the stillness of the corridor that had become a sanctuary for this fragile life. Jake's mind wandered back to the early morning in the hangar, the sequence of quiet events that had led to this revelation. Titan's first whine, the locked locker, the hesitant steps forward. Each was a thread weaving a tapestry of instinct, loyalty, and care. Brooks adjusted the syringe, offering more fluids in slow, measured amounts, and Hope drank with increasing confidence. The warmth of the blanket, the heartbeat of Jake, and the calm presence of Titan created a protective envelope that seemed to defy the outside world, giving the small puppy the courage to trust again. Mercer finally spoke, voice low and careful. "We need to log all access to this area, check every movement, but right now, we protect him. That is the priority." Jake nodded, still, holding Hope close, feeling the fragile weight of responsibility mixed with the growing relief that the puppy's life was stabilizing. Titan leaned slightly into Jake's side, signaling the end of the immediate alert, but still ready to act if necessary. The sun outside had climbed higher, spilling light across the concrete, highlighting dust particles drifting lazily in the air, but inside, the warmth of humanity, canine loyalty, and professional care filled the room in ways the daylight could not reach. Hope twitched again, small eyes flicking to Titan, then to Jake, then back toward the ceiling as if testing the world, measuring safety, understanding instinctively that he was no longer alone. Jake exhaled slowly, feeling the first deep relief that this small life had been found, understood, and supported, the lesson of the morning clear. Sometimes, It is not the alarms, the procedure, or the schedule that matters most, but the quiet insistence of loyalty, awareness, and the courage to act on instinct when it counts. Titan's tail gave a single, deliberate thump against the floor, and the puppy, with all the strength he could muster, nudged forward just slightly. A motion so small it was almost imperceptible, yet in that room, it meant everything. Mercer left the exam room with the evidence bag in one hand and a silence around him that made the hallway clear before he spoke. Jake watched him through the clinic window as he crossed the wet pavement toward Hangar 6, boots steady, shoulders squared, the old tag sealed beneath plastic like a question waiting to be answered. Inside, Hope slept beneath the blue blanket, his small chest rising with a rhythm that was still too quick but no longer frantic. Titan lay beneath the exam table, chin on his paws, amber eyes half open, never fully resting. Dr. Carter dimmed the lamp above the table and moved with quiet purpose, checking the warmer, the fluids, the tiny heartbeat. Brooks stood near the counter, writing careful notes on a medical chart, every word deliberate because some mornings deserve to be recorded with respect. Jake sat on a low stool beside the table, one hand resting near Hope but not touching him now, giving the puppy the dignity of sleep. The room smelled of clean towels, antiseptic, warm plastic tubing, and faint puppy breath. Outside, Camp Lejeune carried on. Trucks moved. Commands echoed. A whistle blew from the training yard. But Jake felt as if the base had shifted around one small life. As if every hard surface had become softer because a dog had refused to ignore sound. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Mercer returned. His face told Jake the answer before his mouth did. It was not anger. It was not relief. It was something heavier. Mercy mixed with sorrow. He closed the exam room door behind him and lowered his voice. I found the locker record. Dr. Carter looked up. Jake stood slowly. Titan lifted his head. C-17 was assigned temporarily to Staff Sergeant Nolan Price during the service litter shutdown. Webb, who had been standing just outside the doorway, stepped in without realizing it. Price from the old K9 program? Mercer nodded once. He retired last Friday. Jake searched his memory. Nolan Price was a quiet man in his late 50s, pale-skinned, silver-haired, always early, always precise. A Marine who had served through decades of change and seemed carved from the same old oak as the benches outside headquarters. He had trained working dogs before half the younger handlers knew how to lace their boots. He was strict, but not unkind. Titan had once pulled toward him across a training field, tail wagging like he had recognized family. Price would not abandon a pup, Jake said. There was no hesitation in his voice. Mercer nodded again, slower this time. That is what I thought. He placed a folded sheet of paper on the counter. So I called his emergency contact. His daughter answered. The room seemed to draw in one careful breath. Dr. Carter removed her gloves and set them aside. Mercer continued, each word measured. Price collapsed at home the morning after retirement. He is alive. He is in the hospital in Wilmington. His daughter said he has been asking about a puppy named Hope since he woke up. Jake looked back at the sleeping pup. Hope's ear twitched at the sound of his name, but he did not wake. He knew him, Brooks said. Softly. Mercer's eyes lowered to the floor for a moment. He more than knew him. Hope was the last pup from the program. Too small for his age. Too quiet during evaluations. The paperwork marked him as unfit for service transfer. Price disagreed. Dr. Carter's face tightened. So what happened? Mercer unfolded the paper. His daughter said he planned to bring Hope to the veterinary annex himself, to ask for a medical review before the final transport. He came to Hangar 6 the night before he retired to collect the puppy's file and training collar. Then a storm warning came through, the power flickered, and the renovation crew started moving equipment early. Price must have put Hope in the locker briefly to keep him warm and safe while he checked something nearby. Webb's voice was barely above a whisper. And then he got sick. Mercer nodded. His daughter said he made it home that night confused and exhausted. By morning, he was in the hospital. Nobody knew Hope was still here. The truth settled over the room without drama, and somehow that made it hurt more. No villain stepped from the shadows. No cruel laugh explained the darkness. Just an old Marine trying to protect a small puppy, a sudden illness, a closed locker, a forgotten wing, and a life slipping quietly beyond everyone's notice. Jake closed his eyes for 1 second. He could see it too clearly. Nolan Price, tired after his final day, rain tapping the hangar roof, a tiny pup wrapped in a towel, a promise meant to last only a few minutes. Sometimes tragedy did not enter with thunder. Sometimes it came through interruption, through timing, through one missed detail in a world too busy to look back. Titan rose and placed his front paws gently against the side of the exam table. Hope stirred beneath the blanket, opened his eyes, and looked toward the older dog. His tiny tail moved once. Barely, but it moved. Dr. Carter covered her mouth with one hand, then quickly lowered it, returning to her work because Hope still needed hands more than tears. Jake leaned over the table. "He did not leave you," he whispered to the puppy. "He was trying to get back." Hope blinked slowly, as if the words meant nothing and everything at once. Mercer took out his phone. Price's daughter asked if we could send a picture. She said he keeps asking whether Hope is warm. Jake looked at Dr. Carter. She nodded. No flash. Mercer raised the phone. Jake stood beside the table, Titan's head near Hope's blanket, and Dr. Carter's hand lightly shielding the puppy from the room. The picture was simple. No ceremony. No speeches. Just a tiny German shepherd alive under a blue blanket, an old K9 watching over him, and a Marine close enough to make sure neither one felt alone. When Mercer sent it, no one spoke. A minute later, his phone buzzed. He read the message, and his face changed. Not much. Just enough. "She says her father is crying." Jake looked down at Titan, whose eyes remained on Hope. The puppy stretched his paw again, searching, and found Titan's muzzle like before. Titan closed his eyes at the touch. Outside, sunlight broke fully over the training yard, bright across the wet grass, turning every puddle gold. Jake felt something inside him loosen, not all the way, but enough to breathe around. The truth inside that locker was not only a hidden puppy. It was a promise interrupted, a loyalty unfinished, and a second chance that had waited in the dark until the right heart heard it. By noon, the rain had moved east and left Camp Lejeune washed clean beneath a pale Carolina sun. The puddles outside the veterinary annex held broken pieces of sky, and the wet grass beyond the K9 yard shone like it had been brushed with light. Hope slept for most of the morning, curled beneath the blue blanket with the warming pad beneath him and Titan stationed on the floor like a silent guard carved from loyalty. Every hour, Dr. Carter checked his temperature. Every few minutes, Jake checked his breathing, though he tried not to make it obvious. Marines were supposed to trust the professionals, and Jake did. But trust did not keep his eyes from drifting back to that tiny rise and fall beneath the blanket. Around 12:30, Mercer returned from headquarters with an update. Nolan Price was stable in the hospital. His daughter, Rebecca, had shown him the picture. The old Marine had been too. Weak to say much, but he had tapped the screen with 2 fingers, right over Hope's face, then over Titan's, as if blessing them both from a bed 30 miles away. When Mercer told them, Webb looked down and pretended to study the floor tiles. Brooks cleared his throat. Dr. Carter turned toward the supply cabinet for longer than necessary. Jake said nothing. He only placed his hand on Titan's neck and felt the dog's steady pulse beneath thick fur. There were some things words made smaller. By early afternoon, Hope opened his eyes with more focus. He blinked at the room, at the soft lights, at the cabinets, at the Marine boots gathered carefully away from the exam table, then at Titan. The moment he saw the older shepherd, his tail gave one small thump beneath the blanket. Titan lifted his head, ears forward, and Hope answered with a tiny sound, rough and uncertain, but alive. Dr. Carter smiled. "That is the strongest noise he has made all day." Jake leaned closer. "You have complaints already?" Hope blinked at him, then sneezed so softly that Webb laughed before he could stop himself. The laughter was quick, almost guilty, but it changed the room. Not into celebration. Not yet. Into something warmer. Something human. Dr. Carter allowed Hope a few drops of puppy formula from a small bottle. He did not drink much at first. His nose wrinkled. His tongue tested the milk like he was deciding whether the world could be trusted. Then Titan gave a quiet huff, and Hope began to drink. Slowly, carefully, enough to make Dr. Carter nod with relief. "There you go," she whispered. "That is it." Little by little, Jake watched the puppy's eyes soften as he swallowed. He thought of Nolan Price trying to protect him. He thought of the locker, the cold metal, the closed door, the thin cry no one had heard until Titan stopped walking. Then he thought of all the quiet things in life that waited for someone to notice. A man too proud to ask for help. A dog standing watch beside an empty bed. A promise folded under a blanket. Hope drank a little more, then turned his head away, exhausted by the effort. Dr. Carter wiped his chin with a cotton pad and settled him back. Down. He needs rest now. But this is good progress. Mercer stepped closer to Jake. Price's daughter asked if Hope could visit once he is strong enough. Jake looked at the puppy. Do you think that is possible? Dr. Carter considered it, then nodded slowly. Not today. Maybe tomorrow, if his temperature stays up and he keeps taking fluids. Short visit. Warm carrier. No stress. Titan's tail tapped once, as if he had cast his vote. Webb whispered, I think Titan wants to go too. Dr. Carter looked down at the old K9. I think Titan would refuse to be left behind. Jake gave a faint smile. It was the first real one he had felt all day. He is stubborn like that. The afternoon stretched soft and golden. Word of the rescue had moved across the base, but Mercer kept the clinic quiet. No one crowded the windows. No one turned Hope into a story before he was strong enough to live it. Marines passed by with slower steps and softer voices. One left a clean towel folded outside the door. Another left a small bag of approved puppy food with a note that simply read, for when he is ready. A young private placed a tiny stuffed bear near the clinic entrance, then walked away quickly before anyone could thank him. Jake saw it all and felt the strange ache of mercy spreading through ordinary people who had spent their lives learning to be tough. Maybe toughness was not the opposite of tenderness. Maybe real toughness was what protected tenderness when the world forgot its value. Near 1600, Hope woke again. This time, he tried to lift his head. His body trembled with the effort. Jake rose instinctively, but Dr. Carter raised a hand. Let him try. Titan stood too, his nose level with the table edge. Hope pushed one paw forward, then the other, wobbling like a small boat in rough water. His legs were weak. His balance failed once, and he sank back into the blanket. Jake's chest tightened, but Hope did not stop. He tried again. This time, Titan moved closer and placed his muzzle near the puppy's shoulder, not touching enough to force him, only close enough to guide. Hope leaned into the warmth. One breath, then another. He rose onto all four paws for 3 trembling seconds. No one cheered. No one dared. The room held its breath. Then Hope took one tiny step toward Titan. Just one. His paw slid on the towel, and Jake caught him gently before he fell. The puppy settled into Jake's hands, tired but awake, and made that small searching sound again. Titan touched his nose to Hope's forehead. Dr. Carter's eyes shone. Mercer looked toward the window, jaw tight, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. Brooks whispered, "That is a fighter." Jake held Hope close, feeling the fragile body warm against his palms. "No," he said softly. "That is a puppy who was loved before we found him." The words filled the room and stayed there. Outside, the flag moved in the afternoon wind. Inside, the smallest Marine on base slept again, not in a locker, not forgotten, but beneath watchful eyes and steady paws, while a team that had come expecting duty found themselves chosen by grace. The next morning arrived gently, as if the world understood that Hope needed softness. A low mist rested over Camp Lejeune, silver along the training yard fences, and the early sun rose behind the pines in slow layers of gold. The air smelled of wet grass, salt carried inland from the coast, and the faint clean scent of the veterinary annex where towels had been warmed before dawn. Hope had made it through the night. That was the first miracle. The second was smaller, almost hidden, the kind that could be missed by anyone in a hurry. When Jake entered the exam room at 0600 with Titan beside him, Hope lifted his head from the blanket and gave one tiny bark. It was rough, almost surprised by itself, but it was a bark. Webb, standing near the sink with a fresh bowl of water, froze like he had just heard taps play backward. Dr. Carter looked up from the chart, and for the first time since the locker, her smile reached her eyes. "Well," she said softly, "somebody has found his voice." Titan stepped forward, nose high, and Hope answered with another small sound, half bark, half squeak, full of life trying on courage. Jake crouched beside the table, placing one hand near the puppy, but letting Hope come to him. Hope wobbled forward across the towel, each step uneven, each breath a little determined prayer. When he reached Jake's hand, He pressed his forehead into the Marine's palm and stayed there. Jake swallowed the ache in his throat. "Good morning, little man." Mercer arrived a few minutes later with permission papers, a small insulated carrier, and a look that said he had already argued with 3 people before breakfast and won every time. Nolan Price was awake, stable, asking again about Hope. Dr. Carter reviewed the puppy's vitals one more time, then nodded. "Short visit. We keep him warm. No passing him around. If he gets tired, we leave." Her eyes moved to Titan. "And yes, he goes too." Titan's ears rose at the sound of his name, though no one had given him a command. By 0800, Jake, Dr. Carter, Mercer, and Titan were in a base vehicle heading toward Wilmington, Hope tucked safely in the carrier on Jake's lap. The ride was quiet. Pine trees streamed past the windows. Morning light flashed between them like pieces of memory. Hope slept most of the way, curled in a nest of towels, one paw resting against the carrier door. Titan sat beside Jake, nose close to the carrier, steadying the puppy with his presence even on the road. At the hospital, the hallways were bright and clean, filled with the soft beeping of machines, rolling carts, and voices lowered out of respect for fragile things. Rebecca Price met them near the elevator. She was pale-skinned, early 30s, with her father's silver blue eyes and the tired posture of someone who had spent the night praying in a chair. When she saw the carrier, her hand went to her mouth. "He made it," she whispered. Jake nodded. Titan found him. Rebecca looked down at the German shepherd. Titan stood still, dignified and calm, accepting her tearful gratitude without demanding anything from it. In room 412, Nolan Price lay propped against white pillows, thinner than Jake remembered, his silver hair combed back, his face pale but alert. His eyes moved first to Titan, then to the carrier. The old Marine did not speak right away. He only lifted one trembling hand. Jake carried Hope close to the bed and opened the carrier door. Hope blinked at the light, then sniffed the air. Something in him recognized the scent before his eyes understood the room. His tiny body stirred. Dr. Carter supported him carefully, and Jake placed him on the blanket near Nolan's hand. Hope took one uncertain step, then another. Nolan's fingers touched the puppy's head with the gentleness of a man holding a promise he thought he had lost. His lips trembled. "There you are," he whispered. It was all he could say. It was enough. Hope leaned into his hand and closed his eyes. Titan stood at the foot of the bed, watching over both of them, while Jake felt the room grow quiet in that sacred way ordinary places sometimes do when grace enters without making noise. Rebecca cried silently beside the window. Mercer looked down at his boots. Dr. Carter checked Hope's breathing, but did not interrupt. Nolan turned his head slowly toward Jake. "I put him there for 5 minutes," he said, voice weak, each word careful. "Storm knocked the power out. I want to get the file. Felt dizzy. Thought I had time." Jake leaned closer. "You were trying to protect him." Nolan's eyes filled. He was too small for the program, but not too small to matter. Hope shifted, pressing his tiny chest against Nolan's wrist, as if answering in the only way he could. Titan gave one low, gentle huff, and the old Marine looked at him. "You heard him," Nolan whispered. "Good dog." Titan's tail moved once. Not proud, not excited, just present. The visit lasted 12 minutes. No more. When Hope began to tire, Dr. Carter wrapped him again and returned him to the carrier. Nolan did not ask to keep him there. Love knew when to hold and when to let healing continue. Before they left, Rebecca placed Nolan's old training patch into Jake's hand. It was worn at the edges, the stitching faded, but the K9 emblem still showed clearly. "Dad wanted Hope to have this when he was strong enough," she said. Jake closed his fingers around it. "He will." Weeks later, Hope returned to the K9 yard, not as equipment, not as a number, but as a living reminder. He grew stronger under Dr. Carter's care, bolder under Titan's watch, and somehow louder every day. He never became the biggest German shepherd on base. He never needed to. When he trotted behind Titan across the grass, ears finally beginning to stand, Marines who had seen hard seasons would pause without knowing why. Some smiled. Some looked away. Some simply stood a little straighter. Jake kept Nolan's patch on Hope's small training vest, just above his name. And every time Hope passed locker C-17, now empty and clean, Titan would slow beside him, not from fear, but from memory. Jake would watch them both in the morning light, and understand what the locker had truly held. Not just a puppy, not just a mistake. It held the proof that a life can be almost missed and still be found, that loyalty can hear what duty overlooks, and that sometimes God answers in the quietest sound a wounded world can make: a small cry, a faithful dog, and the human heart that finally stops to listen.